OLX Cables out in Tottenham in Melbourne West. So as an industrial engineer, you're exposed to various projects in different areas of operation. So one of the areas of operation that I got involved with in terms of study and recommendations to improve, especially in the area of materials handling equipment and so on, was in the warehouse. So
Right.
at OLX Cables, at a very young age, my first job, in fact, as an industrial engineering trainee, I started doing project work in warehouse environments, apart from other areas as well.
Right. So over the years, you have been instrumental in implementing systems. And when I say systems, we're talking software related solutions for various types of companies. Can we discuss a little bit about that? And what I'm trying to figure out here is, how was it then and how is it now? Because you're someone who has unique experience in doing it kind of the old way 30 years ago, and now with everything changing, you're still involved in it. So just talk me through a little bit about the evolution of that whole space.
It has been an amazing change process. If you think about the 70s, it was pre-computer in actual fact. So all the systems that we talk about in terms of concept was done manually using Cardex system to maintain stock, and all the stock movements are all manual, recorded on sheets of paper and so on. So there was no such thing as a scan gun or not even a computer. I mean, I could even say that even calculators at that time, with big companies like OLX Cables, Olympic Cables, was hardly available. You had to fight to have access to a calculator. So things have changed dramatically over the years. So being in industrial engineering, I had the opportunity of doing project studies in various areas, but I specialized in the warehousing space. So I was at OLX Cable a couple of years, and from there I left OLX and joined Dunlop. And at Dunlop, again as an industrial engineer. But at Dunlop, I got promoted eventually after about 5 or 6 years to a factory management position. And being a factory manager, you become responsible for the warehousing operation as well. So I got a word for further in depth into the operation of a warehouse. It's not what you see in terms of cost in a warehouse. It's not what you see that's costly. It's all the air conditioning and everything else, the wiring, the materials handling, all those added costs that really make up or decide how efficient. So as an industrial engineer, I was very conscious of the number of steps a person would walk in a picking product.
Right.
Because every step was additional time and so on. So that was where I suppose my foundation into warehousing operations started. Not only warehousing, but also the supply chain generally. Right? Even at that time in the 70s and 80s, supply chains are controlled by paper. So if you get an order for, say, a piece of furniture, they would actually type it out on a typewriter with 5 copies. And each of those copies would go to different departments for their part of the manufacturing process. And it all comes together in an assembly operation, then gets dispatched. All that now happens on a computer these days, right? Even receipting raw materials, the same thing. It was all done on paper. The delivery dockets were processed on paper, and then stocks, cards, and so on.
So interesting you say that. So when you look at the past and you look at what's happening now, at the time, because it was paper driven and manually driven and you had no other choice, would you say that that was inefficient or that was pretty much good at the time, right? You had no option.
Concepts haven't changed. The concepts are exactly the same, right? It's about managing stocks. You manage stocks by looking at your current usage of that item and All those calculations are still the same, but obviously you had a pool of people to do this work in the old days when it was done manually. I remember there was a friend of mine that worked at Massey Ferguson in Sunshine. Right? They had a big hall full of people, might have been about 50, 60 people on chairs with rollers, moving around, updating cards, stock cards. Right? Now, I'm sure if Massey Ferguson had been around today, and unfortunately they're not, all that to be done on a single computer. Right. So, but as I said before, concepts have not changed. They haven't changed since World War II. Concepts are basically the same. That
Right.
because of my background in industrial engineering and understanding and working with systems, so when the computer age came along, it was a natural for me to move into
Yeah.
computers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brian, that's very interesting. You say that so foundational concepts have remained the same, and that becomes the backbone of any good development process, right? But now with the buzzword being AI, let me ask you, with the advent of AI and other technologies that are fast evolving and advancing today, in your opinion, what are some of the new initiatives that organizations in supply chain could consider adopting, not just a fancy word called AI? Like I know you and I have discussed things like intelligent procurement. Is there something that actually stands out to this audience where you can say, hey guys, this is something you can do maybe starting tomorrow because AI is ready for it, like intelligent procurement?
If you look at the supply chain, right, basically the supply chain has got several processes. One of those processes is to have a warehouse. If you ask me, the best inventory is no inventory at all, because inventory costs money and it doesn't add anything to the product generally. There are some processes, of course, you have to have stock stored in warehouses for a period of time till the product cures and so on. But if you exclude that, any inventory that you have is costing you money in terms of storage. But not only in that, you've obviously got money tied up in stock, which could have been in a bank earning interest. So inventory is not a good thing; it's a bad thing, right? So therefore, you need to look at how you can minimize or optimize that inventory to its fullest using manual systems or even using computer-based systems, but cutting code to be able to optimize your stock levels is very difficult, because if you look at stock levels and if you look at the why you would have a finished good stock, for example, the only reason that you have finished good stock is to neutralize the effect of uh, customer demand, right? To what you can possibly manufacture in batches. If you have to make 100 and the customer demand is only 5, you still make 100 because you can't afford to make 5 because it'll be too inefficient in production costs. So you make 100. The moment you make 100, you have to store the 100 in a warehouse because the customer only needs 5. Progressively, you dispatch them. And then again, at some stage, you manufacture it again. And you end up with a warehouse. If you've got 300 products, all of a sudden you're catering to a product range of 300 in a warehouse environment.
Yeah.
That's why you see big warehouses everywhere.
So is this something like what the Japanese mastered in the 70s and 80s? What was it called? Just in time?
Just in time, yeah. Well, yeah, you work to just in time, but because if you look at efficiency and customer service, unfortunately, they're mutually opposing, right? You can't have both at all times. At some stages, you have to sacrifice customer service for efficiency, and sometimes you have to sacrifice efficiency for customer service. Now, in the example I used before, where the demand for this month is only 5, but you can't afford to make a batch of 5. You have to make a batch of 100 because the setup times and shutdown times are too extensive. Right? So in this example, you actually sacrifice customer service for efficiency. So, like I remember in the 70s, when not 70s, even in the 90s, I used to work. So um, when I left Olex Cable, I joined Dunlop, and then I joined the JGL group, where companies all over Australia. I was head of IT by then. There are a company called Colotex Pantyhose in Sydney, America, in Leichhardt, Sydney. And this company, I remember there was a party on in their sales area, and I sort of just inquired as to what all the commotion was about. And they said, "Look, guess what? We did 85% of what Myers wanted in terms of sales." Because of what was happening at the time in the 80s and even in the early 90s, manufacturing they used to push product into the warehouse, right? To keep the machines going all the time. There was a thing called push and pull. They push product into the warehouse, but most of the products the customers didn't really want. The customers like Myers and David Jones, they were looking for something else altogether. Right? And in a good day, they were lucky to be able to, or to say a good month, they were lucky to be able to meet 85% of the orders they got. So 15% of the orders was they just couldn't supply because they made the wrong product, right? So this is where that mutually opposing forces come into play.
Yeah.
Get efficiency, sometimes customer service has to suffer. In that case, Mars was obviously not happy with Colotex because they were only supplying them 85% of what they needed. Right?
Yeah.
So, but then what happened in terms of technology was then manufacturing companies got close to their suppliers, to their customers. They started understanding their customers more. They knew what the customers wanted better by using products like CRM, because CRMs didn't exist then. Once they got to know their customers better, they knew what the customers needed and so on, and the value of that knowledge they were able to impart to the manufacturing people, so that you had a pull rather than a push. And these days, I mean, the default queues that companies are achieving, that's the delivery in full, on time, and quality, is in the 90s, right? In the 95, 98%. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, it was probably on a good
80,
day,
85.
80% maybe.
Yeah. So you attribute that to automation?
I attribute that to systems generally, right? Especially systems like CRM systems. But today, the manufacturer knows his customers much, much better than he did then. He knows where they are, what their requirements are, what industry they belong to, and with the advent of technology generally, that information has become stronger and stronger. So these days, it's much easier to forecast the requirement of a customer than it was then.
Yeah, very interesting, Brian, those insights, because that's why I said at the start, you having all this background in how it was done before. My next question is going to leapfrog you into getting your insights into the today and tomorrow. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating is that when I use online websites like Amazon Prime, and I go and order something and I hit the submit button, in less than 24 hours, the product is delivered to my doorstep, right? So it could be an imported product, but I think the way Amazon works is they have huge distribution centers in Sydney and Melbourne. Their whole transport system is very different to the traditional transport system of having trucks and all that. Now they have people driving their own vehicles, running their own little business, who pick up those parcels and deliver it. So the speed of delivery and the customer satisfaction has been much greater. So in that context, I'd like to ask you, do you think that traditional processes like EDI are fast evolving to new methods and processes? Something like what I just explained about Amazon, and where with efficient business processes and that are developing so fast that customers are expecting faster and more efficient delivery of products and services. And from wearing your technology hat, how are we going to keep up with all this? Are we expecting
Look,
faster processors or?
like undoubtedly, those processes have become far more efficient. And I mean, if you remember the old days, to get money out of the bank, you had to go to a bank, stand in a queue, get to a unpresent teller who's just about ready to go for lunch, and then do your banking transaction. And the inconvenience of that these days, you just pick up a mobile phone and you can do any banking transaction on a mobile phone. So that that comparison in terms of technology advancement also applies to the supply chain. So these days, you just pick up your mobile phone and place an order for, like you said, Peter. And how do they deliver within 24 hours? To me, that's still amazing, no matter how good technology is. But again, it's all about having information so they know how many Peters are going to place an order on a particular day in Melbourne, right? So they obviously have done their sums and said, okay, we can afford to because there are going to be so many Peters placing an order on a particular day. Let's have a warehouse operation in Melbourne supplied from Sydney, and Sydney's gets supplied from wherever the product comes from, and so on. So they've got their supply chains well sorted out in terms of capability and capacity. And as you know, transport is a lot faster these days. The trucks are bigger. There are virtually trucking trains that they got three compartments that transport goods. So all that comes into play. But there's still a lot of inefficiency in all that processes as well. I mean, we take a few, you just named Amazon and a few of the others who are probably doing this extremely well. But there are a lot of companies that I know of in Melbourne, in particular, that they're still about 10 years behind the Amazons of this world in terms of efficiency and some of that limitation is not because they don't know how to become more efficient, but there is not enough funding to go around to become more efficient. If you take the case of Peerless Foods, for example, they've got a warehouse with 10,000 pallet spaces controlled by one person on a computer. By the way, I'll give Pirko a plug and say Pirko did that. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, but the capital investment in putting up a system like that with gravity-fed racking and cranes running at the back automatically
Needs investment, yeah.
was very expensive, and you needed the floor space and the height of the building and various factors. But it is obviously it is super efficient, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of companies that can't afford that kind of funding, and they are operating with automated methods, which are nowhere near as efficient as those methods that Peerless, for
Right.
example, using. Right?
Interesting you say that with our time limitation, I'll come to my final question here. So on this webinar, we have a whole heap of companies that are suppliers to the large retailers, right? So they may fall into the category of having money allocated for investment in technology, and a whole heap of them who may not have the budgets to do that. But I would guess most of them would have invested in some shape or form in an ERP solution and a warehouse management solution to start with. So let me ask you of some final thoughts here. What are some of the initiatives that organizations should prioritize now that ERP and other software solutions are in place in their organization? So they've got limited budgets, but now we have things like AI, we have lots of things like integrations via APIs into different systems. If they have uh, a system running smoothly at the moment, for them to become more efficient and more cost effective, give me 2 or 3 points that they can consider for high priority investments in 2026.
So, for example, Peter, look, in my view, AI makes things cheaper. It does not make things more expensive, right? So, for example, if you look at a standard company, I won't name a company, but a company that is heavily involved in procurement, might have a procurement bill of about, say, 50 million, and I've got a sales team of about 4 or 5 people. with a revenue of, say, 60 million, for example. So what can you do with AI these days that you couldn't do maybe 5 years ago is that, so this company has got a purchase planning report written, written by code, which comes and basically tells them what items they need to order, right? And when they need to order it and what quantity they should order it and with which supplier. But this was done through code, right? So now with AI, you can virtually take that data, that's relevant data, and throw it into an AI engine and ask it to do exactly the same thing, right? Within about 3 days.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is now that capability, which wasn't available to some of the smaller companies because it was expensive to code cut,
Is
is
available
now
now.
all of a sudden available to them through AI. So
Yeah,
this is at the
yeah.
procurement end, right? And any savings you make at the procurement end goes to the bottom line straight away, right? Because then you get closer to your suppliers, they're able to do the analysis and so on. At the sales end, the same thing applies. You've got 5 salespeople, and they cover a certain territory. They've got a certain number of customers to service. All of us are using AI, which gives them better routing and which customers are likely to order next, and all that fine tuning of the sales process, they can probably manage with 3. So it's making things
Fantastic.
easier and the business becomes more efficient. And all these savings hits the bottom line
Yeah, that's
with no
very
additional cost.
encouraging, Brian. I'm sure the people on this webinar will be very encouraged by that. I'd like to thank you for your time today and sharing your thoughts. At the end of this session, your contact details will be there as well. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you and find out more information or ask for some advice, I'm sure you wouldn't mind doing that with them.
Not a
So
problem.
thank you very much for your time today.
Thank
So
you, Peter.